Welcome to the Lost Ways of Knowing podcast. Your host is Matthew Krebs, religious scholar, philosopher, and co-founder of Circle Yoga Shala. The Lost Ways of Knowing teaches a basic history of the Indian traditions that are central to modern yoga. If you're a yoga teacher or practitioner, you must listen for a clear, concise, and provocative engagement with how this history might apply to today's world. The ultimate aim of this podcast is to initiate a dialogue about awakening and overcoming self-deception, leading to deeper intimacy with what is real. Matthew's coming to you from his home, Circle Yoga Shala, which is also a working farm and yoga teacher, yoga therapy training facility.
Welcome, everyone. Last time we opened up a dialogue about the need for meaning in human life, and we began to make suggestions about the relationship between meaning and realness, namely that which is most meaningful is that which is most real. And since this podcast is contextualized in the area of yoga, and the idea that central to the yoga traditions is the notion of awakening from ignorance and illusion, then this endeavor of yoga, this work that we do, is fueled in part by an intuition that we have that as we awaken, we can become more real. Our lives can become more meaningful. We can discover in a way that we're more real, or possibly we can grow in our realness. We talked a little bit last time about the possibility that the modern world is in a meaning crisis and something like a wisdom famine, and that a symptom of this is that it's getting harder and harder to intuit what is real, and therefore more difficult to experience meaning. We suggested that from the perspective of the yoga tradition, this looks something like loss of contact with our essence. That we took an idea of essence as bliss from the Taittiriya Upanishad, and we talked about the problems that would come when this sort of metabolic function in our soul is perverted by ignorance. Namely, that we suffer from modal confusion, or from confusion of two particular modes that we tend to operate in as we move through the world. One mode is of having, and one mode is of being. And so we have having needs and we have being needs. Having needs are needs that contribute to our survival and status. And being needs are accomplished through the event of self-transcendence. And they're experienced as a sense of greater belonging and a deeper intimacy with what is real. And so when having and being are confused, we tend to act as if consumerism, or having more money, or having more status, or having things like that, that's going to help us with these deep existential problems. But the reality is that those things will never fulfill our being needs, because having something will never substitute for becoming something that is noble and wise. Now, both of these sets of needs or modes are definitely important. We need them both, but we live in a consumer culture that doesn't tend to value being. No one sees how it's going to contribute to the GDP. And so we don't live in a culture that generally knows how to teach us wisdom. Therefore, it doesn't know how to transmit the activity of self-transcendence. And therefore, it can't ultimately create the sense of belonging that is most native to this bliss that we are. We want to go deeper into this notion of realness in this podcast and kind of drill down into the specifics of it, because they're really fascinating. But before I do that, I want to introduce you to a thinker who is very, very important in the ongoing inquiry that we do at the Shala. His name is Dr. John Vervaeke, Vervaeke. He is a cognitive scientist and a philosopher at the University of Toronto. I came across Dr. Vervaeke's work because he took a sabbatical several years ago and made a 52-part series called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, which was one of the most interesting and enlightening things that I have ever come across. It was immensely helpful in opening my mind through a convergence of cognitive science and philosophy and Eastern traditions and Western wisdom traditions. Just an amazing, amazing piece of work, and it's for free, and I recommend that everyone sort of seek that out and get into it. He also has another series that has been ongoing after he finished Awakening from the Meaning Crisis called After Socrates, which takes up some of those same issues. He has a foundation called the Vervaeke Foundation that you can find, where there are many, many dialogues and podcasts, an attempt to teach practices like meditation and movement, community-oriented activity, all geared toward and sort of centering around the cultivation of wisdom and meaning in life. Though much of what I say about realness here directly comes from his work. But before we get into the specifics of what I want to say about realness, I want to suggest that even if philosophically or in terms of belief you find this concept of the real to be problematic, I want to suggest that you're functioning within this concept or within this idea, the idea that something like realness is actually what really matters. And we can take a second to look at language, the language that we use, and try to look at adjectival and adverbial concepts that point toward realness. So these are just gathered, randomly from the dictionary. As far as adjectives go, realness means something like that which is actual or factual, material, tangible, concrete, palpable, corporeal, substantial, genuine, authentic, sincere, true, or from the heart. So you can kind of see that adjectively, the concept of realness means something that's available to us, that we can touch, that our senses can be in relationship with, something that is substantial, something that is moreover true or sincere, something not false or fake, and something deeply connected to the knowing that the human heart does. Adverbially, the idea of realness is communicated through words like very, extremely, exceedingly, exceptionally, especially, tremendously, immensely, vastly, hugely, extraordinarily, and excessively. And so in terms of an adverb, the idea of realness is an amplifier of anything. We could combine those two: very actual, extremely tangible, exceedingly concrete, especially substantial, exceptionally from the heart, extraordinarily from the heart, excessively sincere. So given all of this together, you can kind of see that realness is sensed as something concrete, something I can be in physical and mental relationship with, that comes to me through my senses. It's something that doesn't come and go. It's lasting. It's substantial. It's something that's trustworthy, that I'm willing to base future prediction on. I'm willing to risk action on this sense that there's something real. When I come into contact with it, its presence is intense. It tends to be able to increase in its meaning or intensity, and it emphasizes or accentuates any particular thing or event that I'm in relationship with. So regardless of what you may believe or think, I suggest that we all live and respond to these kinds of notions all the time, and therefore that we're operating in an assumed framework of realness. Now, according to Dr. Vervaeke, you can drill down inside this idea that the most meaningful is the most real, and you can pull out 4 particular areas that give us a sense of what realness is about, or how we experience realness, or how, when we don't experience these things, we sense that what we're doing or what we're thinking about or what has happened to us is less real and therefore less meaningful. And there are 4 of these dimensions. One of them is purpose. One of them is coherence. One of them is significance. And one of them, Dr. Vervaeke calls mattering. Let's go through these one by one to get a sense of what they're like. So number 1, we have purpose. Purpose could be called the for the sake of which things are done or understood or desired. All desires have a for the sake of which. All actions have a for the sake of which. Actions are not done purposelessly, even if they're done in ignorance. What's interesting about this sense of purpose, according to Dr. Vervaeke, is that it needs to be connected to non-instrumental ends like goodness, truth, and beauty in order for it to ultimately contribute to realness. And so the purpose that he's talking about is not simply the ordinary mundane purpose, like the purpose of a knife is to cut, and it could cut anything in particular. It could even try to cut things that it can't cut if it were being used ignorantly. Like you don't use a chef's knife to chop bricks unless you're a fool. And so the fact that a knife can cut shows its instrumental end, and it doesn't have many other instrumental or other ends, except if you connect the knife to something like nourishment, and then you connect that nourishment to something like being awake such that I could seek enlightenment or moral goodness or the ability to be honest or the ability to encounter beauty. And so something that is a non-instrumental end, like these 3 universals of goodness, truth, and beauty, these things are not valued only in the sense of what they promise us, but we value them in themselves. We're engaged in goodness because it's good to do so. We seek the truth and tell the truth because it's good to tell the truth, not just because of what it will do if we tell the truth. And we love to experience beauty, not just because it will make us happy, because it doesn't always make us happy. Sometimes it makes us sad. We seek it because it's a good in itself. And so this purpose that we're talking about that contributes to realness has to be connected to something ultimate like that for it to really flesh out. If we don't have this non-instrumental orientation toward the purpose of realness, then we fall prey to a particular kind of irrationality. And that is this hyper-focus on the goal of something that we're doing. And we never cease looking at anything except the goal. That means we never take our intelligence and examine the process by which we are moving toward that goal. And the turning of intelligence onto the process of something is a piece of wisdom. So next there's coherence. Coherence is meaningfulness, or the fact that things fit together. Co means together, and herence is something like the right relationship, the right ratio or fitting of things. So life and our understanding of it cannot generate meaning if the world is incoherent. Another way to say that is if the world presents itself all the time as chaotic, we can't find any meaning in it, and therefore it doesn't seem real to us. What it seems in this case is absurd. So the world needs to be intelligible. What's it like when the world is intelligible? So when the world is intelligible, I have access to explanation. I feel like I know things that can explain parts of the world, but I also feel in turn that the world itself explains the things that I know. So my understanding is in the right relationship with my experience. The more coherent things are, the more real they seem to us. The third quality here is the quality of significance. And this is an interesting one to define. To signify is to be a sign of in a certain way. But we should also think of something being important here. So significance is the sense that the world is really real, or it's importantly real. This feeling is the feeling that I'm connected in the deepest possible way to the sense making that I'm always engaged in. So I'm always engaged in making sense of things or trying to make sense of things. And when I'm connected to that capacity, things begin to be more and more significant. I'm taken deeper and deeper in. Things become more important. I understand more of them. And in turn, I understand more of myself in this reciprocal opening that's taking place. Dr. Vervaeke notes that significance is part of what he calls provability. We're always engaged in a sense of, in a certain way of proving and disproving, of sort of making predictions about what will happen and what has happened. Provability is the sense that my understanding is not only predictive of certain results in a way that is satisfactory, but that a deeper intelligibility is revealing itself. I'm beginning to be able to discover and interpret new patterns in the world and spot counterfactuals that allow me to understand realities in ways that I couldn't before. The last piece is called mattering, like it matters what I'm doing. Mattering seems to me to sort of be all of the others kind of rolled into one, or the end result in a sense that I feel like what I am and what I'm doing matters is a signpost that I'm in contact with what is real, with what is greater than me, and I'm in a deepening relationship with it. Mattering is the sense of being connected to something beyond myself that has a reality and a value independent of my own egocentric preferences. Now, I think that definition is sufficient to think of. And what I'm going to do now is go back to a few questions that I gave in the first little section of the last episode. And I said, these questions are questions that you can ask yourself if you're wondering what is meaningful. Now we can say if you're wondering what really matters, and also if you're wondering what is really real, you can ask yourself these two questions as a sort of assessment. Number one, what do you want to exist even when you no longer exist? Number two, how much of a difference do you make to that now? What are you doing now that contributes to the continued existence of this X that you want to continue after you? So if you can only answer the first question, what do you want to exist even when you don't, then you're in the seeking phase of life because you're not doing anything to contribute to that. You haven't drilled down, drawn your line in the sand and said, this is my action in relation to this, for the sake of which that is significant and coherent in my life. If you can't answer either of the questions, then mattering in your life is low, and consequently meaning is low. And this is a dangerous situation according to the cognitive science that Dr. Vervaeke is engaged in and the research that he's doing. When mattering and meaning is low, realness is low, and these scenarios, or this scenario, is predictive of many bad outcomes in life. So that would include bad physical health, bad financial outcomes, not making enough money, irrationally spending money, not knowing the value of finances and how to manage them, bad relational outcomes, many broken relationships, no relationship, the sense of feeling alone, and bad psychological health. Now I want to finish up with a couple of thought experiments, because the backside of realness is illusion. And illusion is something that the yoga tradition has been very, very interested in for a long time. And there are many thought experiments that come out of the Upanishads, for instance, that talk about illusion and the significance of being brought out of illusion. That moment of being brought out of illusion can be called the moment of realization, a moment of deep absorption, being free of your former context, a moment when higher mind has broken through ignorance and has begun to direct the perception of the organism. These two thought experiments are interesting because one has generally a negative valence that arises from coming out of illusion, and one has a positive valence that emerges from coming out of an illusion, or realizing that you're not seeing what it is you thought you were seeing. So here's the first one. Imagine that on your 21st birthday, your parents come to you and they sit you down and they say, listen, we have something that we have to tell you. Ever since you were a child, from well before you could remember, we've been engaged in psychological, sociological experiment that has been directed by the CIA. And we are not actually your biological parents. We are CIA agents that have lived here and raised you all of this time. And these people take you then into a secret room in the house that's an observation room with many TV screens, with cameras that look into every room in the house, so that they could observe you 24/7 for whatever purposes they are contracted to engage in by the Central Intelligence Agency. And they then say to you, we have done well by you. We have treated you as if we loved you, told you we've loved you, comforted you in your distress all through your developmental period, fed you, taken care of you. We fulfilled the role of parent as completely as anyone could have. But now that you're 21, you're of age, and we have to tell you what's actually going on. Now, from here on out, we can continue to act in the capacity of your parents, but you're also free to leave and not be involved with this anymore. What do you do? Or even more importantly, does this information matter to you? Do you say, oh, well, it's been good. Y'all have been good to me. You have fed me. You've loved me. You've told me the things that parents are supposed to tell their kids. And so, yeah, let's just keep going in the way that we have. And I'll act as if you're my biological parents, as if nothing important has happened. The vast majority of students that I've told this story to, in order to demonstrate coming into contact with realness and coming out of a particular illusion, the vast majority of people say, oh no, this changes everything. This changes everything. The feeling in my heart changes, which is the foundation for all action and all concern. The second thought experiment comes out of a general teaching from the Upanishads. And this is a teaching that is so classic about waking up from an illusion. You would call it a general teaching from Vedanta. And it's known as the rope snake lesson. And so imagine this. You've been gone all day long. You've been at work doing whatever it is you do in the Vedic society. And you're on your way home and it's dusk. So it's beginning to get dark. And you come to the hut or the home where you live, set your stuff down outside the door, take your shoes off, as is your habit to do, and you walk into the house and get ready to wash up, make dinner, start to rest. And all of a sudden you see over in the corner of the hut a snake coiled up. Immediately you're gripped with fear. Cobras are very, very important in the history, the literal history, and also the mythology of India. Cobras are deadly, responsible for many, many deaths of animals, deaths of people. Something that you really have to watch out for And so as soon as this snake is seen, you're gripped with fear. Your heart rushes, your hair stands on up, your mouth begins to get dry. You back away, but you fixate your eyes on the snake. And then all of a sudden, because your eyes are focusing in the dusk and the darkness of the hut, you realize, it's not a snake. It's a rope. Immediately, endorphins and serotonin and safety neurotransmitters flood your body. And this is coincident with the relaxation of your muscles and a deep sigh of realization. I'm incorrect. I saw an illusion. I can sit down now again. Continue on with what I was doing. I'm safe. Notice that each of these examples are examples of coming more and more into contact with the real. They all have to do with purpose. They all have to do with coherence, coming apart and then coming together again in greater clarity. They have to do ultimately with what matters. What should I care about? And what should I do now? They're about meaning, and therefore they're about the importance of realness and the need to be in a true, good, and beautiful relationship with it. So let's make a summary. What is most meaningful to us is what is experienced as most real. As we've seen, realness has four main dimensions: purpose, a transcendental purpose; coherence, it is non-chaotic; significance, it connects me to my meaning-making function and gives me a sense that I'm going deeper into reality through that; and realness matters. It tells me intuitively what I should care about and therefore what I should do. These four things all contribute to the experience of the real. And it's important to remember any serious lack of them, any one of them in particular, or all of them to some degree, is predictive of bad physical, financial, relational, and psychological outcomes. The experience of the real is often coincident with the shattering of an illusion and awakening in a certain way. And though the shattering of an illusion always lands us closer to what is true, to what is more real, it's not always a pleasant experience, but it's absolutely necessary. And this tells you much about the bravery, the depth, and the intensity of experience that something like a profound wisdom tradition that yoga is will facilitate in a practitioner. The practitioner will be guided through the shattering of many illusions in relation to the external world, illusions in relation to identity, illusions in relation to the self, illusions in relation to intuition and revelation and its meaning in our lives, illusions in relation to knowledge. All of these things will be taken through the grinder of purpose and coherence and significance and mattering, in the hopes that we come into deeper intimacy with what is real and we begin to avoid foolishness and we begin to self-transcend and overcome ignorance. So I want to thank you for listening. It means a lot for your participation. It's very important to us. God bless you all, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Lost Ways of Knowing podcast. We hope it was informative and also inspiring for you. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and leave a review for us so other yoga teachers and practitioners can find us. For in-person opportunities to learn and grow in a community setting, visit circleyogashala.com.